Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined today by two excellent guests. First by journalist Simon Pia on this side of me, and on this side we have Jim Fairlie, a farmer who started Scotland's first farmers market. So Jim, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Ken. And yourself?
I'm not bad. And Simon, how are things with you?
Good, getting through the lockdown okay,
Well, that's the main thing. We start today just with our coronavirus statistics update. This update is up to 2 p.m. yesterday. Today's figures, of course, will be announced at 2 p.m. today. And as of 2 p.m. yesterday, a total of 85,604 people in Scotland have been tested. Of those, 71,157 were confirmed negative, and 14,447 tests were positive. 2,094 patients who tested positive have now sadly died. And 59 patients were in intensive care last night, with 49 of those having tested positive. And there were a total of 1,011 people in Scottish hospitals with confirmed COVID-19 and a further 405 where it is suspected. And again, those numbers in hospital have just been creeping down pretty consistently now for a week or two. So that's where we are with the numbers. Simon, first, how are you feeling about just the general state of play where we are just now?
I think it tends to look as though it's moving in the right direction. But I got involved in a bit of an issue on Friday because Jason Leach had appeared on Radio Clyde, and I've been a bit of a critic of his. And some people don't want you to criticise at all at this moment, which I think is wrong. And I think the media has actually been a bit remiss in not being rigorous enough from the beginning about this. And I think the Scottish government has got off. I think Sturgeon, she comes across, she's far better in a press conference. People can relate to her a lot more than the UK government, any of their spokespeople they put up. But it's clear that a lot of these mistakes were made by the Scottish government. And I think she made a big mistake. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's easy with hindsight, but I think it was quite obvious in February there was a problem, and even earlier than that, which the government should have been aware of. I think Nicola Sturgeon made a mistake in not taking more of an independent line from the UK government, and I think it would have paid off politically. And I'm not meaning to be cynical about that. I think it was the right thing that she should have done a lot earlier. Now, she started doing that in the last 2 to 3 weeks. But from the beginning, she should have been alert enough. Jean Freeman, as a health minister, I mean, I'm surprised at some of the lack of good questions from the Scottish Parliament. And the person who's come up with the best questions so far has been Neil Finlay, the Labour MSP. He's been the most probing, and you can tell that he's been speaking to Debbie Sridhar at Edinburgh University, and he's trying to be, where did we go wrong? Why did we not test, trace, and isolate? And the reality is our testing right across the UK, but Scotland is worse than England. Our care home situation is worse than England. We see what's happened up in Portree. And all these facts, we have got to ask ourselves, why did this happen? And I think it's too easy for the Scottish government to try and pass this down the road to Westminster. And why was the Scottish Health Minister not alert at the end of January as to what was happening? Because one of the most interesting stories I saw during the week last week was about Kerala, the state of Kerala, southern India, 35 million people. They've had 4 deaths and 502 cases of COVID. And that is because the health minister, now they have a GDP of about £2,000 a person compared to us, which is about £33,000. How can a state like that, the state in southern India, she just got on the phone and said, let's get into action, let's start testing, tracing, isolating, etc., and support for people in these situations. And this woman, KK Shaliaja, and they caught, she's become a bit of a cult hero. You can look it up online, but it's quite remarkable. They're actually, a communist state. They've got this reputation, although, to be quite honest, they're social democratic. But what it shows is the Scottish government was too timid Sturgeon, I congratulate her. I tweeted last weekend, every Scottish political party should support her from taking separate decisions different from the UK government. But she was slow off the mark. Was Jean Freeman, our health minister, aware of the WHO report at the end of January? Was she aware of the Lancet editorial? You think a health minister would be aware of these things, but systemically, and this is 30 years, 40 years of lack of proper funding for the NHS, it is a disgrace, the lack of PPE. It's a disgrace, the state of the care homes. As many people know, I'm a former Scottish Labour spin doctor for my sins. I try to get into the 2011 manifesto, take care into the NHS and public ownership. I see there's an article in the Sunday Times about this. I've been tweeting this during the lockdown, and I see some politicians beginning to respond to this. But it is a disgrace if we come out of this and let that care workers who are terribly paid, too much of it is a private profiteering racket that kicked off in the late 80s, early 90s. Everybody knows that. But the fact is a disgrace, and we cannot just point the finger at the UK government. Why was the Scottish government why did we not have proper PPE protection? Why were we not able to test properly? Why were we not able to protect care workers? Now, of the European countries, I don't know if it's worldwide, but we now have the most death. We've got the highest death rate among health workers, and that is scandalous.
Yeah. Well, Simon,
country. And I'm not sorry. I'll just while I'm on my rant. Sunday Times today, Scotland's got more billionaires than ever. I don't know if you saw that. The richness, which makes me actually feel quite nauseous, but I was checking it out, and the amount of billionaires in Scotland has risen. And there's the UK and Scotland, and for people who say, oh, Scotland can't be an independent country, it'd be too skint, that's rubbish. We are a wealthy country, but the SNP, Labour's guilty of this. Everyone bought into neoliberalism. Everyone bought into not enough state investment. And we saw it in the 2008 crisis, and now we're seeing it again. The taxpayer, the state is intervening. Now, that was a dirty word, and mainstream political parties have all been guilty, and point the finger at more at the centre left, SNP and Labour, Lib Dems, Green. They have not been bold and brave enough. Whether they will respond properly to this, who knows?
Well, Simon, you have touched on a number of things that we were planning to discuss today, but certainly there's a lot there for people to think about. If you do want to get involved in the discussion at home, then you can do so. You can follow us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, and you can get into the conversation using the hashtag FoolScottish. We would love to hear from you. Now, the first thing we were planning to talk about was care homes. Now, Simon, you've had a wee bit to say there. Jim, we've heard this week from the Scottish Government they're introducing new legislation to enable Scottish ministers to take over running a care home if they think that things aren't being managed well. This is going to be a much quicker process than it ever was in the past. Do you think that's kind of too little too late, or do you think that's a good step for the Scottish Government to be taking at this stage?
It's never too little too late. We're in the middle of an unprecedented healthcare crisis that we haven't seen in this country for, well, certainly not in my lifetime anyway. And Nicola Sturgeon has said it time and time again that they're learning as they go along. And some of the stuff that Simon said there at the start, I would agree with. I think we should have taken an absolutely Scottish perspective on how we handled the crisis right from the start. From a farming point of view, if you relate that back to the foot and mouth outbreak in 2000, and the diseases are different, but the transmission methodology is very, very similar in terms of its contact that allows the virus to transfer. And in England, when the outbreak in England was detected back in 2000, it took them about 10 or 12 days to shut down movement. But the president of the NFU in Scotland at the time was a guy called Jim Walker. And as soon as there was a case in Scotland, he insisted that the door get shut and that no movement of livestock was allowed at all. Now, there is an argument there that we couldn't have gotten away with that in Scotland at this time because you're dealing with people. So you're dealing with people's freedoms and the right to travel, the right to move, the right to work, and all the rest of it. But the reality is, the disease doesn't care about the politics. It doesn't care about the nuances of the arguments about devolution and who's got the right to do what.
Mm-hmm.
It to do what it's going to do, which is transmit to other people and kill people. So I would have liked to have seen the SNP being a lot bolder right at the start and said, we're closing the door. We've got these cases, whether it was in Edinburgh or whether it was at Tayside, is a moot point, and I'm quite sure that will be discussed at some length. But what we should have been doing at that stage, for my thinking, was we should have shut the door. We should have isolated people at airports. We should have tested them there. We should have put them into quarantine and made sure that the disease didn't get a hold. You've just talked about the figures there, and they have risen consistently. Mm-hmm. There's only ways to deal with this kind of disease. You either stop it from moving at all, or you become herd immune. And it seems to me that the UK position right at the start was go for herd immunity. They took cold feet and then tracked back a bit to try and find some other solution of getting around it. But we're now in the position where the disease is in the community, and if that then means that the government have to take control of care homes in order to get it under control, slow down the number of infections, and hopefully reduce the deaths to the absolute minimum that they can be, then I would absolutely support them in doing that. And I take a wee exception to a bit that Simon said there, that it's too easy to say. We are in unprecedented times. We've never dealt with a human pandemic like this, as I've said, in our lifetimes, and there's going to be mistakes that will be made. Now, that's not to say that mistakes shouldn't be highlighted, but for me right now, let's deal with the pandemic. Let's stop people dying to the best of our ability and make sure that when we come out the other side, that we've got a better understanding of who the key workers are, because key workers are the ones that are still on the front line, the ones that are in the hospitals, lifting our rubbish, producing our food. Those are the key workers. And I look for a positive on the other side of this, that the people who have been furloughed, we've got a lot of people who are now taking stock of their own lives and thinking, did we really need to be running at 100 miles an hour every day of the week? The atmosphere in the sky is clearer. Pollution is clearing. You're getting fish appearing in rivers that have never had fish for decades, that people have never seen before. So there will be positives that come out of the other side of this. And what I'm desperately hoping we don't do is get in for a political tit for tat. Well, you should have done this and you should have done that. We are where we are, so let's get through it the best way that we can, and then look at how we can change the way that we run our society, our environment, our food systems, once we get through the other side of this. But I don't think we're anywhere near through the other side, because if you go back to the Spanish flu, its first wave killed about 4 or 5 million people. Its second wave killed over 40 million people. Mm-hmm. And we've still got that potential for a second wave to hit. And I think the UK government's position last week of starting to lift the lockdown on an economic basis, which is what they're doing, is going to see a massive spike in numbers down south, which is going to put them back and will cost more lives than we've currently lost already. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned a wee bit about animal disease control, obviously something you would know more about than I do. What can we learn in terms of human pandemic management from the veterinary world? I mean, we have, for example, veterinary labs that could potentially be doing helping with some of this testing that we need to do. What do you think the government can learn from how we have managed animal diseases in the past?
Well, the biggest one that we had was foot and mouth. Another thing I was reading this morning, Andrew Tickell had it in the National. He was talking about how the Scottish Tory MPs have been thrown under the bus to a certain extent by their boss, who said, we will be in lockstep. And then you've got Alistair Jacks, absolutely rigid, we will be in lockstep, we will do everything together. And then 4 or 5 days later, Boris Johnson comes out and says, well, actually, there might be possibilities of variational changes. Mm-hmm. the thing that really infuriated me about Johnson's position last week was the fact that he never once, during any of his public addresses, talked about the fact that he was speaking only to England. Thankfully, Nicola Sturgeon was absolutely on it with that. She never let go on it. And eventually the media caught up and says, yeah, you're right, we need to make sure that people know that this is England only we're talking about, and that all the stay-at-home message is still the message that goes out in the other 3 devolved nations. So what we've learned in animal diseases is that we had an outbreak of foot and mouth in 2000, which completely shut the whole country. We had mass slaughters and funeral pyres, as you know. Mm-hmm. But there was another outbreak, I think it was about a decade later. And what they managed to do then was regionalise, find those hotspots, lock those areas down. They still do the same with TB in cattle. There are certain areas in the country that are TB hotspots. Mm-hmm. When foot and mouth was found in 2011 or 12, whenever it was, that was done on the basis that that's where the hotspot is. We shut that area down and the rest of the country can carry on as normal. But what that requires is instant reaction and the stopping of movement. So if there are human health diseases, it's like if the government knew that the Nike meeting in Edinburgh had people there, the test, trace and isolate at that stage could have stopped more cases in Edinburgh. But because we didn't know if that was the first one, we don't know where it originated from. We had the first one that was confirmed in Tayside. Mm-hmm. You've got to know where it is. You've got to know who's got it, and you've got to be able to contact everybody who's been in that vicinity and close them down, because it moves by people or animals moving.
Yeah. Now, Simon, coming back to you, this agriculture issues have been coming up this week again. The Tory MPs in Scotland voted against protecting UK food standards as we look at this potential Brexit deal. What do you think about the way the food system and the agricultural sector has been exposed by this crisis? I mean, obviously you're not a farmer, but looking from the outside, what do you make of how the agriculture sector is holding up just now?
Well, I mean, the Scottish agriculture sector. See, I mean, Jim, by all means, intervene and tell me I'm talking rubbish here. But Scotland, quite strong in livestock, dairy, cereals, etc. My understanding is that a lot of Scottish farmers, well, there was quite a lot of ambivalence about Brexit amongst them. I think as well, Scottish farmers and the UK farming industry are also aware that the consumers are different from in the US, and what the Conservative government is trying to push through. And I think, generally speaking, we've seen that develop throughout the last 20, 30 years. People are a lot more conscious about the standards in our food sector and farming sector. And I think the great majority of people, not just in Scotland, I think across the UK, are more in tune with have previously or up to date have been EU standards, and are wary about any deals with that would open us up to different standards from the US. And I think that's quite widely felt, and I think that will become. I think more people who read the Daily Mail will get more agitated about chlorinated chicken than they will about migrants or so many other issues. So you'll get people in Middle England who are possibly, are conservatives. They might even have voted for Brexit, but that is one thing that will bother them. I think also I'd be interested to hear Jim's views on how the farming sector feels about these the change in standards, or the American meat coming into this country, etc. What their reaction to this is, because our understanding as well is that the Scottish agriculture sector prides itself on its high standards and the high quality.
Yeah.
And again, Jim, please correct me, but Scotland is known, its reputation is for high quality agricultural products.
Yeah, Jim, I was actually just going to come to you on that, because this week we've seen the Brexit negotiations kind of come up to nothing. There very little came out of those. We've seen this decision about not necessarily protecting UK food standards. How is the agricultural sector in Scotland feeling about just everything that's happening just now, from the pandemic to this Brexit crisis that's kind of on the horizon?
Well, first of all, in terms of lockdown, the vast majority of farming families in Scotland will have seen absolutely no difference whatsoever up to now with lockdown, because they were all busy either calving cows, lambing sheep, or sowing cereals. So they've been working 7 days a week, enormous lengths of time during the day anyway. It was one of the jokes that my wife and I had, was that generally we had a lockdown at least for 6 to 8 weeks every year anyway, because when I was lambing big numbers of ewes, then she never saw me. I came in, got fed, and went back out again, and then slept for 4 hours, and then went back out again. We didn't go anywhere, we didn't see anyone. So lockdown in itself has not affected the farming community up to now. Where it is going to start affecting them is there will be no shows, there will be no agricultural shows. And one of the things that is a real concern within the agriculture community, when you work yourself, there is the tendency to dwell on things, and a lot of farm workers, they do work on their own, and the mental health that lockdown is going to bring, that the people in urban settings are feeling just now, will start to grow with the farming community throughout the summer, because their social interaction is to go to these agricultural shows, to speak to their friends, talk about how lambing went, how calving went, or whatever. So there's going to be a time lag in the proper effect of what lockdown means to the agriculture community. In terms of where they are and with the Brexit negotiations and with trade deals and all the rest of it, I can tell you that there is massive anger in the Scottish farming community just now, because Neil Parish, who is a Tory MP down in England, he's also the chair of the Rural Affairs and Farming Committee in Westminster. He tried to attach an amendment to the agricultural bill, which will take over from the CAP regulations that we currently work under. He tried to attach an amendment to the agricultural bill that's just gone through its third reading in the House of Commons. And it was to ensure that the food standards and safety and welfare systems that we apply in this country were the same, that we had equivalents for any imports that were coming into the country. It was voted down, but the crucial thing from our point of view is there were 6 Tory MPs, all in rural constituencies, who all voted against it. So they voted that amendment down, which means some of them are arguing that what they can do is they can possibly do something when it comes to the trade deal. There is Neil Parish is quite hopeful that the Lords might kick it back to the Commons to add this amendment back in, or to re-look at that amendment. But I don't think there is a snowball's chance in hell that they're going to do anything that is going to jeopardise their ability to do a free trade agreement with the United States. And that was further proven by the fact that Liz Truss also announced within 24 hours, or it was announced in the Financial Times within 24 hours, that she is relaxing or reducing the tariff schedule, or the amount of tariffs that she will have on agricultural products, in order to ease the deal of getting a free trade agreement with America. Now, I'm speaking to farmers here who I know are absolutely staunch, and I'm not going to use the word Tory, I'm going to use the word Scottish Conservative, and they've always voted Scottish Conservative. They're small c Conservative. There are Tories in Scotland, but don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of farmers who are small c Conservative, and they are absolutely furious at the way this has been done, and that they have been sold down the river. Boris Johnson said right at the start of the election campaign that he would under no circumstances undermine the standards that we adhere to in this country. They've turned that round by saying, yeah, we're not going to reduce the standards that you work to in this country, but we'll try and put good labelling on so that people understand that when American beef comes over here, it's American beef, and if they want to choose the better, the higher standard quality food that you put on, then they'll choose that. But if you take the economic crash that we're in at the moment, the reduction in tariffs that is going to come with American food coming into this country, and we're then relying on supermarkets to be the gatekeeper of the standards that we hold. But what's going to happen is they will put on American beef, Australian beef, New Zealand beef onto the supermarket shelves right beside ours. And ours is always going to be more expensive because of the systems that we have to employ in order to meet the standards that we meet. And they're going to be cheaper. So when a family is about to hit the financial crisis that there's going to come, because all these furloughed wages, it's not free money. The tax rises that are going to have to come at the other side of this will be significant. The payback is going to come further down the line at the same time as these American trade deals are going to be done, or WHO trade deals are going to be done. The housewife is going to be making the choice about how much money she has to feed her family, or whoever it is, whether it's house husband, house wife, whatever. Consumers are going to be making the choice. How much money do I have to feed my family? I can get that American steak there, which will be a minute label to tell them it's an American steak. It's $3.99, or I can pay $7.99 for that steak that comes from Scotland. They may want to, in their heart, support Scottish farmers, but their budget's going to tell them they're going to have to buy that cheaper beef. And that's the dilemma that the Scottish farming industry is going to have when we go forward, because we will never, ever be able to compete on the basis of price with the major agricultural producers like America, South America, New Zealand, Australia. These guys can just do it so much cheaper than we can, because we have to adhere to standards that are world-beating, but they're also very expensive.
Yeah. And there's also another issue that comes with the European question, and that's immigration. To what extent is the sector concerned about a lack of workers because so many farms rely on migrant labour?
Well, the one thing that the virus has thrown up is the absolute nonsense that we were told prior to the Brexit vote, that UK workers will very easily pick up the work that we don't have from the free movement of people. There are tens of thousands of people furloughed at the moment, and we are still bringing Eastern Europeans in to pick fruit. So whether it is because farmers don't trust the UK workers to take that job on, and then if furlough gets lifted, they go back to their normal jobs, or whether it's because the farming community are relying on it. Picking berries is a skilled job. It doesn't sound. It's regarded as manual labour. It goes back to what I said right at the start. Who are the key workers? Picking berries to the standards that we want, so that they're delivered at the correct ripeness, the right size for the right punnet, for the right market that's going into. It's a skilled job, and it's very hard work. So the farming community have built up fantastic teams of Eastern European pickers who come over here, work very hard, get paid very well, and then go home again. And it's a system that works. We can't go back to what I did as a kid, go and pick berries for my school uniform. It's just not that kind of industry anymore. We've got a just-in-time food system where people want to get the freshest berries on their shelves from the local farms as best they can, and it requires an awful lot more than jingoistic nonsense that's coming from the Brexiteers who are saying, oh yeah, all these British people, they'll come in and pick the berries. It's not happening. We're in a position just now where these people are out of work, and it's not happening. They're still bringing in Eastern Europeans. Yeah. So the whole point of them saying right at the start that this will be sorted out by the British workforce has proven to be wholly inaccurate, and it can only get worse when we go back to people actually being employed.
And Simon, the reason I asked about the immigration is because today Ben McPherson, the migration minister in the Scottish Government, has written to the UK government asking for all migrants to be given leave to remain and to lift the restrictions on people who have no recourse to public funds. Because obviously people who maybe had been working and supporting themselves are now not able to work, but because they have no recourse to public funds, they're not eligible for the furlough scheme or things like that. What's been your take on how immigration, or how immigrants rather, have been a part of this crisis? We're seeing obviously in the agriculture sector, as Jim was talking about, but also in the care sector, very high levels of immigrant workers.
Yeah, that was a point I was going to make, Kenny. I mean, care homes right across Scotland, right across Britain, a lot of EU migrant workers, a lot of people from. I've actually met a few who are working in care homes, and as Jim said, these are jobs that they're. I mean, don't tell me that you don't need skills to work in a care home. Jim was making the point about working in agriculture and berry picking. You do need skills, but they are low-paid jobs, and that is a problem. This thing has not been thought through by the UK government. The Tory government hasn't properly considered the effect I believe it will have on the economy. And Scotland is also quite unique among European countries. Is we want migrants. I mean, regarding our population and our economy. And I think it's something that the Scottish government has to be applauded for. They've always had a very progressive attitude towards migration on both regards human rights, civil liberties, etc., but also economic ones, economically. There's a possibility that because of the virus that people might be more wary about people crossing borders to the same extent. And I was actually asking somebody in Italy about this because, there's a lot of, where the virus kicked off in Italy, in the north and northeast, there's actually quite a lot of Chinese immigrants working there in the textile leather goods industries, small-scale factories. And I was expecting them to tell me that there had been more of a reaction against the Chinese, but he said that wasn't the case. There hasn't been any... And that up in the north of Italy, they've got the Lega, Salvini's party, who are, quite anti-migrant, the right wing, verging towards. I wouldn't call them fascist, but they're going in that direction. But the population, there has not been an anti-Chinese migrant worker reaction in the north of Italy. And I think people here, it's interesting because people might have fears about borders to a certain extent, but it's a point I think Jim also touched on, that when we come out of this all, it actually does point out to everybody how globally interconnected the world is today. And the idea that you shut up borders, the idea that you look inward, you can do that on a day-to-day basis when you're going through a lockdown. But mentally, I think people realise that we need world solutions. And one of the best people who I've heard come forward politically to speak about how we deal with this has been Gordon Brown. I don't know if you remembered he made 2 to 3 weeks ago, he was going around and speaking about how you needed a reaction like they had in 2008 to the financial crisis. And unfortunately, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump in particular, but other leaders, they've just shown themselves incapable. Maybe because it's different. It's not about high finance, and high finance people can organise these things and look after their own interests. But another big question we've got to ask ourselves, after the financial crisis, we came out of that. I mean, it went through over a decade of austerity, which has impacted upon the investment in the health service and the care service. And this has been brought home to us, the effect of what that lack of proper investment has been. And we're paying for that just now. And how people will, Rishi Sunak, there's yesterday's papers we're looking at there and discussing about taxes will go up. We all know that. I think people accept that. But what sort of, at what rates and what levels, and it's juxtaposed, as I said, you saw the Sunday Times rich list out today. So what are we going to do about the high rates of taxation? what action is going to be taken against corporations, because there's a huge amount of corporate tax avoidance that we're all aware of. So whether or not, and I wouldn't say I'm not an optimist about this. I'm sort of quite pessimistic in some ways. I don't know if we will come through with taking out the positive lessons that we've learned from this, and people collectively helping out. Because the fact of the matter as well is most people have abided by a lockdown. And a point I think that governments and political leaders everywhere, they're being a bit timid in taking action and leading on this, because I think they're always trying to second guess, what will the media say, what sort of criticism will I get. And I think both Johnson, Nicola Sturgeon, Drakeford, Arlene Foster, they might have all been thinking, maybe their instinct was saying, maybe I should go with this, we should take action. But then again, am I going to get hammered in the media? And the problem is all politicians, political leaders, that is wired into their DNA these days, is what is going to be the media response. At times you've got to say, stuff the media, particularly large sections of the UK media. But I still think this has been a trend for a long time, and it goes back a couple of decades at least, that politicians are a bit more timid than they were in previous generations. And I think that applies right across political parties.
Jim, on that note, this week we've seen some lockdown protests, people talking about wanting to come out of lockdown a lot sooner, people arguing, I mean, we've seen claims about, it's caused by 5G and some of these nonsense ideas. But there are some kind of legitimate concerns about this, about lockdown, about whether we can trust the government to do the right thing. People concerned about things like the contact tracing app the UK government's talking about, and whether that's going to be people's data is going to be safe. What's been your reaction to these protests? And do you think people have a legitimate point to make that the government doesn't have a right to tell us to all stay in the house?
No, I don't. I have absolutely no truck with it whatsoever. People are dying. It's that simple. And these people, I don't know if it's the kind of, I hate to use the phrase Trumpian thinking that it's all a mass conspiracy and everyone's out to get us and you can't infringe on my rights. But what makes your rights more important than my rights? And that's always been the big debate. Whose rights trump whose? And if it hasn't affected them personally and they're thinking, well, this is all nonsense, ask yourself, why are all these people dying on a daily basis? Why is Nicola Sturgeon coming out and telling us about the numbers of people who have died in the previous 24 hours from this disease? I've got absolutely no sympathy at all. I mean, I watched, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was some of this stuff coming over from America, where you had Trump supporters going to the church, going to praise God that they were safe. And a guy was interviewing this woman in her car, and she was saying, I'm dripped in Jesus' blood, nothing can happen to me. And you think, how selfish is it? Because you're not protecting yourself, you're protecting everyone in your community. I've got an 80-year-old father and an 81-year-old mother, and they're both fragile in their health at the moment. My dad's as sharp as a tack, so is my mum. And you're thinking, I want to continue to have those conversations. Your body might not be as good as it used to be, but the brains are still there. Mm-hmm. Some of the sharp people, all of that experience that you lose by allowing old people to die, it just beggars belief that people would be so stupid, crass, or selfish to think that this is a good idea to go out onto the streets and protest that their personal liberties have been taken away. I get a certain extent of the concern as far as the tracing app from the UK government is concerned. I'm not entirely convinced I'd be comfortable with my own information going like that, because I don't trust the UK government with anything, let alone my personal details on an app in my phone. But as far as just taking the virus seriously, I don't think that these people have genuinely considered what it is that we're trying to do in terms of controlling it. People are dying. It's as simple as that. And not only are they dying, there are people who will be affected by this virus for years to come. They may not die just now, but their lungs, their respiratory systems are going to be affected for many years to come. And I just find it incredibly selfish that because they can't go to a pub or go to a restaurant, that they're going to go out and protest in the street. But what I did see is it has come to very, very little in Scotland. The vast majority of people in Scotland have taken on board the severity of the crisis that we're in. I think the Scottish Government did a poll this week where there had about 84 or 85% acceptance and agreement that the Scottish Government are handling it in the right way by making sure that the lockdown continues. And until we can see an almost flatlining of the virus, I would say that that's what we have to stick to.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there were a very tiny number of protesters at Glasgow Green yesterday, but nothing compared to what we've seen, as you say, in the US or even in London. To what extent, Jim, do you think the media have a role to play in all of this? I mean, we've seen some parts of the media, some commentators, some columnists and whatnot, saying, we have to get out of lockdown. This is all a farce. It's got to stop. And then some of the headlines, as Simon was saying, some of the headlines, some of the attitude of the media has not necessarily been taking the facts, taking the science very seriously. What role do you think the media has had in all of this?
Well, I've been watching Nicola Sturgeon's press briefings, and I'm watching her exasperation. I don't know if I'm contradicting Simon here to a certain extent. He thinks that they haven't been probing enough, and he may be right in that they're not
initially
getting forensic on it. And some of the questioning that is coming from the media seems to me to be politically motivated, and it just drives me nuts. Let's just get this bit done and dusted. This is serious. So let's just get this bit done and dusted. The forensic analysis will come later. I'll tell you who did do a very good job, and it's one of the things that one of the reasons why the Tories are so desperate to get all the MPs back in the House of Commons. Keir Starmer has been forensic in his dissecting of Boris Johnson in the House of Commons, and they're desperate to get him, all these boo boys behind him, because it's the only way that he can perform. He can't stand there face to face and take the questioning that Keir Starmer's putting to him. I watched the clip the other day there when they were talking about the deaths in care homes, and he was saying, well, where did this extra 10,000 deaths come from the previous years? If they're not COVID related, where have they come from? And he just wouldn't let up on it, and Johnson has got nowhere to turn on that. So I think he's actually done a good job in probing that, and I think the media in Scotland just stay off the politics. I absolutely agree, they've got to be forensically looking at the details and say, how can we do this better? But it's really not a time for point scoring. It's a time to make sure we get through this with the least amount of casualties that we possibly can. And afterwards, we'll have the reviews, we'll have the discussions, we'll look at the things we did right, we'll look at the things we did wrong. But for now, I just want people just to get through it so that we can get back to some kind of normality.
Sure. And Simon, kind of the same question to you, really. What do you think the media? What do you think of the performance of the media overall in terms of kind of getting the right information out, encouraging the right attitudes, and kind of all of that stuff? What do you think of the way that the media have performed as a rule?
Well, just like on everything, there's so much media nowadays, and on every incident, every big story that happens, it's mixed. You've got some very good journalism going on, and some not so good, some poor journalism and stuff that's just rubbish. I would disagree with Jim to a certain extent, because I think the media at first in Scotland were just accepting a bit too much at face value. Now, I saw Jason Leach, the National Clinical Director, on March the 12th. He went on Off the Ball with Tam Cowan and Stuart Cosgrove and saying, "Oh, go round and see your." Tam Cowan said, "Can I go and see my parents who are, in their 80s?" And he said, "Oh yeah, just wash your hands, go round and see them." Now, I knew that was bad, that was not the right advice. Then a couple of days later, he was on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan. First time in my life I probably agreed with Piers Morgan. And he's blithely going on about it's okay going to the Stereophonics concert. His wife had gone along. Now, time and again, he also said don't wear masks at one stage. So the media have been praising Nicola Sturgeon, and she has deserved that, because the difference between her performance at these daily briefings and the UK government is chalk and cheese. She's very good at that, and I think most people think Sturgeon is a decent person who cares about the public, who cares about the National Health Service. How much she and her government has actually done to boost it is another question. They don't get that from the UK government. They don't feel that. They don't feel any empathy whatsoever. But you can't, like the Nike conference, when that news came out, and I've seen a lot of people on social media, you cannot ignore that. The journalists, you would criticise journalists even more if they turned a blind eye. Say if that had happened down in London and they turned a blind eye to the Tory government response, if it had been similar to the Scottish government's. And I think, this is maybe not the time for a big inquiry into it, but they will have to answer later down the road. And it did smell like a cover-up, and people who are even quite supportive of Sturgeon say that. But overall, in recent weeks, she's come onto her own, and she is very good in these situations. You see about these nutters who are going out and dancing. I agree with Jim in this. This is hyper-individualism, and this is part of a it's a right-wing political thought that's been developing and growing over. You can go back to the Thatcher era. You can define it like this. It's all about the individual rather than the common good. There's no such thing as society, as Thatcher famously said at the Mound at the Church of Scotland General Secretary, that notorious quote. And you've got the apotheosis of it now in people like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, who sort of epitomise that mentality. I remember Johnson saying, take it on the chin, and be prepared, we'll lose some of our loved ones, all this sort of thing. He's been, I think, chastened by his own experience. But you've got that clash at the moment, the hyper-individualism, or do you go for the common weal? And as Jim said, the great majority of people in Scotland and across the UK have abided by it. But you've got this section, and then every political argument and debate in Britain is twisted because we have a predominantly right-wing press. Now, it's factually proven. You see the Global Pew report. It's the most right-wing in Western Europe. The Telegraph, the Mail, the Sun, the Times, etc., etc. They are all pushing this line. And I go back again. I don't think if Johnson hadn't ended up in hospital and had that experience himself, I think he would have been more gung-ho at the moment. I think that has chastened him. I think the experience has, experience that what the NHS are doing probably has had an impact on him. But
facing
also
your own
those scare
mortality
stories as well. I think about the apps and that. I mean, I think people can hack anything they want these days. That's the reality. Nothing's really private, unfortunately, online.
True. Now, just sorry, Jim.
One thing. The irony of Simon talking about its right-wing individuals and very self-leaning. I was listening to Radio Scotland this morning. They were talking about the media down in England, saying that there were think tanks down in England who were talking about these protests as being the government were allowing these left-wingers to be out of control. So you're talking about the right-wing media in this country. They're blaming the left wing, while Simon, he's blaming the right wing. I think the nut job term was probably closer to the truth.
Yeah. Now, just very quickly, we are fairly short of time here, but other politics does go on despite this crisis. And this week we had a report from the Public Accounts Committee saying that the HS2 project had been blindsided by contact with reality which I thought was just a marvellous way of describing it. This report was absolutely scathing. Said the cost controls had been completely lost. The Department for Transport, the Permanent Secretary, had given answers that didn't tell the truth to the committee. The annual report had hidden the scale of the problems. Grant Shapps, of course, now says that everything's fine, that new measures have been put in place. So, Simon, I guess the big question is, do you believe Grant Shapps?
Yeah. This government is probably, it's just politics aside, but the calibre of the individuals is definitely the worst in my lifetime. The UK government, if you look at it, Priti Patel, Grant Shapps, Gavin Williamson, the Prime Minister himself. It's just such a poor effect. It's worryingly because the idea of having, you go into Europe and you look at the good rail services in France, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain. They're so superior, and it's public money that's basically, some of them have been privatized or semi-privatized, but it's basically they've been public projects, but they were way ahead of us. We went the other way in the 80s, and then in the 90s it was John Major who privatized rail. Mm-hmm. Most people, polls time and again show you, most people believe in having public ownership of the rail service. We've fallen behind, but then again, government, these are bigger questions. Just government doesn't seem to function very well, and it's something that in the UK and Scotland as well. Even in Scotland, we should even look at the Scottish Parliament, how that went out of control, the price of it. You look at the Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh, and we shouldn't be complacent. These are bigger questions about the Scottish government, the UK government, our system, why we cannot properly put into action public massive projects. Because the idea of HS2 on paper, the idea of linking up, the north of England with high-speed rail, is on paper is something I would say, it sounds like a good idea. It should have been done long ago, but obviously it's run into, I don't know enough about the ins and outs and details, but you just read about it, the price rocketing out of control.
Yeah, it's a big story that's been dragging on for years. Jim, just very quickly to you, do you have any confidence that we're ever actually going to see HS2 completed, or do you think at some stage they're just going to say it's no more good money after bad?
I've got to be honest with you, I switched off the HS2 quite a long time ago for exactly the reason that Simon was just talking about. It's one of these massive money pits that our influence on what's going to happen with it is so limited or non-existent that there's absolutely nothing that we can do about it, and what it is that they're going to do, the money they're going to spend. And I switched off to paying attention to it, other than how much it was going to cost us and our contribution to the pooling and sharing. The fact that we have any input to it at all just drives me nuts. But whether it gets finished or not, that's anybody's guess. The one thing I was going to say to Simon, I could be completely wrong on this, in terms of the build escalation price in the Scottish Parliament, was there not something to do with that after the Twin Towers coming down, that they had to rearrange some of the infrastructure to make it more security? Well, am I not right in thinking that it wasn't just because we lost control of the project?
No, I don't. I think that's a bit of a red herring that people put out, because I was actually working there when I remember Tom McCabe, who's no longer with us, was on the committee, and him tell me about this extra spending. This was after the spending went on, after the building had gone up, and they brought in all these bollards, etc., etc. But no, I just think there is a problem. I think because the public realm has been undermined for 30, 40 years. And I think that the problem is that governments, local governments, public bodies have difficulty in procurement and, making these things happen. And they don't, there's too many that go wrong. And as I said, the Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh is it's a sad, pitiful story.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of,
especially at a time like this. It sort of brings it home to you.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of these big projects, as you say, throughout the UK that we could talk at great length about, and maybe we will at some other time. But we only have a few minutes left, and I did want to get to this last story. It's yesterday, several thousand citizens in Sarajevo gathered to protest against a mass that was being held for people who were killed in Bleiburg in 1945. These were Ustašas, Croatian nationalists, pro-Nazis, who had gone to Bleiburg in Austria hoping to escape the communist forces that were kind of overtaking Yugoslavia at that point. The British Army turned them back, and they were murdered. They were killed by the people who were not very happy with the things that they had done during the war. And they've held this mass every year since then. The Croatian nationalists perceive it as a symbol of the suffering that they had under communism. But of course, anti-fascist protesters see it as a pro-Nazi occasion and have protested against it. So, Simon, just very quickly, do you have any thoughts on this event and how we manage those kinds of tensions that still exist?
This has been springing up in Europe. I mean, a lot of Europe, like, we've been quite lucky in these islands. Well, Ireland hasn't been, but we didn't suffer. And I've seen this happening in Italy. It's happening in Spain with the Spanish Civil War, because people agreed to just forget about it and move on after the Second World War. And now, after the Spanish Civil War, and now people are beginning to go back and realize that you just can't erase the past. In fact, this is a messy, dirty story. The Croatians bonded basically with the Germans. It was identified Catholic Europe versus Muslim Serbs, Muslim Kosovans, etc., etc. And it's got there's been you could say that the history and tensions are 500-600 years old between religious and ethnic groups in that part of the world. And the fact of the matter is the Croats sided with the Nazi regime, and they did create, and I can well understand anti-fascists reacting to this. And, unfortunately, it's something that we are worried about is you're seeing pro-fascists or groups springing up. We've seen it in Hungary, touch of it in Slovenia, all across Europe, and it's something that you've got to be very alert to. And, I can understand why it's so sensitive to people in the Balkans, and people, anti-fascists, feel so strongly about that.
Absolutely, yeah. And Jim, again, same question, really. Do you have anything to say about this incident?
The thing that surprised me is I've just learned that it was a mass that was held by the Catholic Church. I think that was part of the celebration, which I found that quite strange. But Simon's right. There is definitely little pockets of this right-wing fascism popping up all over Europe, and it is absolutely something that we would need to be alert to, because it was. I think Europe kind of allowed itself to sleepwalk into the last situation where the right-wing fascism became the deadly force that it became. Yeah. So we need to be aware of it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that is all we've got time for today. I'd like to thank Simon and Jim for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. There wouldn't be any point in making these shows if you weren't joining in, and it was great to see so many of you tweeting in during the show as well. Thanks for that. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please do. Every penny counts here. And if you're able to, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter there, and your £5 a month can make a huge difference to the quantity, the quality, and the type of programmes we can produce here at Broadcasting Scotland. We'd also like to remind you, if you can't afford it, then please don't feel bad about that. We know times are tough. So please do follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, search Broadcasting Scotland on Facebook, and from there you can share the programmes out with people, let them know about us. That's the biggest thing you can do for us right now, is to let people know where we are, what we do, and why you think it's worth watching the shows. And of course, there's always work to be done here as well. So if you're willing and able to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland in whatever capacity, then please do get in touch and let us know. We'll find work for you to do. So that is all from me just now. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with Scotland at 7. I'll be back as normal on Tuesday. But until then, thanks once again to my guests, Simon Pia and Jim Fairlie. Thank you to you for joining us. I've been Kenny McBride. Have a great day.